It's Friday, so let's answer some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you are that new listener and you want to know how Mailbag Friday works, well, throughout the week, you can send me a question on X. You can send me a question on YouTube, and I'll be sure to get to every single one, assuming we don't have 40 or 50 like we've had one time. And if I don't get to your question, if I did scan over it and forgot to come back to it, just shoot me a direct message and I'll try to answer it in a timely manner. With that, let's start it off with question number 1. This comes from Tonal Recall. Will we see an alternative lineup against a righty pitcher? Pham, Witt, and Perez against righties too. So it looks like you're looking to see if the Royals will get a little bit more creative against righties and take some guys out of the lineup. I would view it this way. Tommy Pham, Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez are going to be the main 3 guys that are always in the lineup. I'll probably throw Kyle Isbell in there. And if you're more so asking about the postseason, those would be the 4. Maybe I'll throw Michael Massey in as the 5 everyday players. They could get more creative with Maikel Garcia, Paul DeJong, Adam Frazier, Yuli Gurriel, Freddie Fermin. We know that there's a collection of guys that the Royals view as every other day players. But no, when they're facing righties and lefties, I think the top 3 guys will be Tommy Pham, Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez. That's been the lineup, or the top 3 in the lineup, pretty much every single game since Tommy Pham joined this team. So no, I don't see them going with any alternative looks against a right-hander, and they'll see 2 right-handers in this San Francisco series and then a lefty and Blake Snell on Sunday. Question number 2 comes from No Name. What do you think the playoff roster looks like? Who should be able to come off the injured list? Who gets left off? Good question here. If you're looking at the postseason roster, I think pretty much everybody on it right now is going to stay on that roster because Chris Stratton's on the injured list. You look at Will Smith is still on the injured list. Lorenzen's still on Lorenzen, I think, is not technically on the injured list. Maybe they extended it. I'd have to go back and double check. But if there's going to be anybody added, I think Lorenzen gets added. And I think he would take the place of Steven Cruz, who replaced Chris Stratton, or he replaced James MacArthur. So I think there's a chance Lorenzen joins that roster. But other than that, I think the guys we thought that were going to be left off are on the injured list. I thought Chris Stratton was going to be left off. He's on the injured list. I don't envision him coming off the injured list to be added to the postseason roster. I think they'll carry the 2 catchers with Freddie Fermin and Salvador Perez. I think guys like Yuli Gurriel, Robbie Grossman, Tommy Pham, the new guys, they're going to be on the postseason roster. The regulars are all going to be there. Paul DeJong, of course. And yeah, I think that you look at some of the starting pitchers that are going to be moved to the bullpen, like an Alec Marsh, like a Brady Singer, and like a Michael Lorenzen. So you might need to take some of those guys off, but it does get a little bit tricky when you're removing guys in the bullpen. I think Steven Cruz gets taken off. He's really just there right now while the Royals are waiting for Michael Lorenzen to come back. But there's still plenty of time to iron out some of those details. But I would imagine the only guy that you're expecting to get added would be Michael Lorenzen. I don't see Hunter Harvey getting healthy enough in time to join the postseason roster. Next question comes from Ben. How much influence does Pat Mahomes have on this winning Royals team? I know he only has 1% ownership, but I assume he has outsized influence due to his celebrity. I wonder if the Royals would have extended Bobby or signed as many players in the offseason without him. I do think that he had some form of an impact, but I think it was more so about what he did with the Chiefs. I mean, We know how much Kansas City loves its football, and the fact the Chiefs are 3-time Super Bowl champs with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, I think it showcased to the Royals, hey, if you want to compete with the football team and popularity in the city, you need to be more aggressive than just trying to wait on a rebuild. But I do think a lot of it came from John Sherman forcing the issue, giving J.J. Picollo more money, and J.J. Picollo being a very transactional general manager. And that's what we saw. I think we got to give credit to a lot of people in the Royals organization to make moves like that. But I think I'd be naive in saying that Patrick Mahomes didn't have much of an impact. I think as involved as he is in terms of spreading it on social media, being as much of a fan as he is, that helps, right? Because that gets support from a lot of people in Kansas City who really just care about the Chiefs. Because if Patrick Mahomes supports him, well, then they're going to support him as well. Matt asked, are you surprised with all of our off days the Royals haven't started putting together starting pitching for the 3-game playoff series? Reagan's, Wacha, and Lugo have to be the 3 guys, but right now Singer is in between Wacha and Lugo. It doesn't really surprise me. I think the Royals will hopefully be able to do that this next weekend against Atlanta, because first things first, you want to be able to lock up a spot, and you don't want to have to rush anybody on short rest. So if the Royals go out there and sweep San Francisco, and let's say Detroit takes only 1 of 3 from Baltimore and Minnesota takes only 1 of 3 from Boston, that would give you a 5-game lead with the tiebreaker with 6 games to go against Detroit. I think at that point going into the Washington series, you could take that a little bit more seriously. But right now, I think they want to stay the course with what they have. And hopefully by the time they get to that Atlanta series, they can give some of those guys breathers, give some of those guys a break so they don't run into an issue of having to use Reagans and Lugo in that final series against Atlanta, therefore making things a little bit more complicated in a wild card series, assuming they would make it. So not a bad question at all. It has crossed my mind, but I think first things first, they want to keep everything as is until they would actually lock up a playoff spot. Next one comes from Aiden. With how red hot Detroit is there a chance that the Royals can catch the Orioles in the standings for the top wild card spot? Like this question because I did kind of contemplate that yesterday, that now that Minnesota is tied with Detroit, do the Royals fans actually go into this weekend rooting for the Tigers and just rooting for Minnesota to bottom out? Because if Boston takes down Minnesota this weekend and Detroit does its job against Baltimore, well, let's say in this scenario for this hypothetical here, the Royals sweep the Giants, and let's say the Tigers take 2 of 3 from Baltimore, the Royals can make some serious ground against Baltimore for the top spot in the wild card. And keep in mind, Baltimore still has to go on the road to New York to take on the Yankees, but who knows what the Yankees are really playing for at that point. I believe they've got the postseason spot locked up, but they don't have the division locked up just yet. That could change here in the next few days or so, depending on what happens with Baltimore. But yeah, there is a real world possibility in which Detroit goes in there and takes care of Baltimore. Baltimore is leaking oil, I think, worse than anybody in the American League because of how good they were in the first half. In the second half, they haven't been good. Their bullpen has struggled. Their starting pitching isn't as strong. Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman have taken steps back. So if you are a Royals fan and you're thinking about going to the postseason, I think Baltimore is the team you want to draw. But right now it's about getting in to the postseason, not so much about seeding. Because you got swept by Detroit, you got to focus on just getting back up on the horse and getting into the postseason. But if you are going to live on the dangerous side, you could root for the Tigers this weekend. And if the Royals keep winning against the Giants, well, then they would be making some serious ground and bettering their spot in the postseason. But you run the risk of you don't play well against the Giants and the Twins and the Tigers start winning. Now you feel like you're in a dangerous spot. Because if the Orioles keep winning, it doesn't really matter for the Royals' postseason chances. If Detroit or Minnesota do, that is going to be a problematic thing for the Royals. So we'll have to see what happens this weekend at Camden Yards, at Fenway Park, and, of course, at Kauffman Stadium. We'll get to one more here before our break. Neil asks, is there in any hypothetical where the Twins, Royals, and Tigers three-way tie, the Tigers lose because of losing both head-to-head tiebreakers, correct? If there was a 3-game tie, yes, that would leave the Tigers on the outside because the Tigers do not have the tiebreaker over the Royals and the Twins. So that would leave the Tigers on the outside looking in because of the tiebreaker, and there is no more game 163. But good question there. I hadn't really thought about that to this point in time. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, still a lot of questions to get to next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors is going to have you covered. Now, with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. An eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So again, visit them at ebaymotors.com today. We're going to jump back into our next set of questions on X. This one comes from Jeremy looking to 2025. What are the biggest needs the Royals can address through free agency and the farm system? And number two, what are your early thoughts on the Royals and how they stack up in the AL Central in 2025? I think the biggest need the Royals have going into 2025 is the bullpen, right? I think the bullpen is going to be another area to address, but you can do it differently than you had to last offseason. Last offseason, the Royals had to go in to December and January looking to overhaul the entire unit. You don't need to do that. You need to maybe find a really good setup guy, and maybe you already feel like you have that setup guy. You'll have Lucas Erceg back. You'll have Chris Bubich back. You'll have John Schreiber back. You'll have Hunter Harvey back. You could bring back Sam Long. I know that minor league deal has a couple of things within it, but you could easily bring back Sam Long if you wanted to. And I know the Royals really like Sam Long. So there's 5 guys right there. And if you just wanted to keep them, sure. But what about Daniel Lynch? He's certainly earned a spot on this postseason roster, assuming the Royals get there. What about Carlos Hernandez? He's looked really good. So if you have 6 guys right there, 7 guys, maybe you go out there and spend a good chunk of money on bringing in one guy who's locked down that you can pair with Bubich and Erceg in the last 3 innings, because that ran into a lot of issues this year with the Royals. When MacArthur was struggling, Will Smith was struggling. I think the Royals are going to go out there and target some more high-powered guys and take a page out of the Tigers book. Look for guys that can throw heat. Don't look for the guys that had a good track record a few years ago, like Will Smith, like Chris Stratton, like Nick Anderson. Go after some guys that were good last year and can significantly impact your bullpen. So I think that's one area to address. Also, I think they're going to go out there and add another corner outfield bat. I don't think MJ Melendez is an everyday starter anymore. If you bring Hunter Renfroe back, we assume Kyle Isbell's going to be back. Find a left fielder that you can give a 2-year deal to and give you a little bit more thump in the lineup than MJ Melendez did. So that would be my thoughts on addressing some of the things in 2025 or the offseason going into 2025. Also, to the farm system, I think there's nobody you need to go after and try to add to your farm system, because I don't believe they're going to be selling anybody in the offseason. If the Royals do not play well in 2025, you could look into trading away Seth Lugo or trading away a Lucas Erceg, somebody like that. But right now, that's not going to be the focus. The Royals are going to look to build on a very strong 2024. And for how they stack up in 2025, I mean, I see no reason why they couldn't finish first, second, or third next year. I mean, White Sox are not going to be good again. The Tigers, if they're healthy, are going to be just as good as they are right now. The Twins, maybe they do take a step back because ownership's not going to give them a lot of money to spend. And Cleveland's still incredibly young, so it wouldn't shock me if the 2025 AL Central looks very similar to what it looked like this year. Next one comes from Nels. Chances MJ gets moved this offseason. I don't think he's going to get moved because the Royals could view him as a bench bat going into 2025. I know that MJ Melendez does different things than Garrett Hampson and Adam Frazier, but he's a left-handed bat with power off the bench. If you sign somebody else to start every day, MJ Melendez might be able to maximize some of his value. And if you view that as little value, at least he's got some power you could bring in off the bench for late-game pinch-hitting situations, which he has done well in from time to time this year. So I don't think it's really a possibility that he does get moved in the offseason unless somebody was really eager and felt like they could fix MJ Melendez with their own hitting coaches. Nathan asked, how should they manage the starting rotation next week? Just normal, and should Marsh get another start? I do think the Royals are going to handle their rotation pretty normally until they clinch a playoff spot if they can. Until that point, I see no reason why Alec Marsh wouldn't get another start because Michael Lorenzen's not healthy. If Michael Lorenzen is healthy, you could certainly look into that for the national series because that would be the next time that Marsh starts, which I believe would be on Tuesday. However, they got that off day on Monday. So if things get into a dire situation where the Royals don't play well against the Giants and the Tigers and Twins play well, and now you're fighting for your life in the national series, you could skip Marsh's start. So you would go Wacha, Singer, and Lugo. Reagan's would go on Tuesday, and then you could look to just skipping his start, Marsh's start, and go to Wacha then on Tuesday and go right into Brady Singer for Thursday's game. So certainly possible, but if you take care of business against the Giants, you're not going to have to worry about one of those guys going on shorter rest or having to skip somebody's spot in the rotation. But until Lorenzen is healthy, I think Alec Marsh is going to get another start in 2024. Tony asked, with 2 off days today and Monday, they could skip Marsh and move Lugo and Reagan's up. That'll align them with games 1 and 2 in the wild card. Is that something they will and should do? Well, funny that question was right above where Nathan's was. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a possibility. And the Royals will probably start constructing their rotation to match them up well in the wild card game. Because we've talked about this multiple times on the podcast. The only way the Royals get past a Baltimore or a Houston in the first round is if the starting rotation is healthy and looks good. And if they are not on fumes, if they are at their strongest point. I mean, they can't win a playoff series if Cole Reagans and Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha can't make it out of the 6th inning. They're going to need 2 of those guys to have a 6+ inning start because of the way that the bullpen is. It's just not a very deep bullpen, and you're relying on Lucas Erceg to get multiple outs in a playoff game. You're relying on Chris Bubich to get some work there, and you just can't trust everybody in that bullpen. So if there is any way to give that rotation a little extra help, a little extra depth there, they are certainly going to do so. But they have to clinch a spot first before you can even think about kind of moving around your rotation. Ben asked the question, what do you think our record would be if Bobby didn't exist? I mean, his WAR is 10. So if I was just playing that, the wins above replacement, I would say that the Royals would have 10 less wins than they do right now. But realistically, if Bobby Witt Jr. was not on this team, they're probably a 68 to 70 win team at this point. I would say a little bit more than 10 games worse because we also have to factor in how good the rotation has been, right? So if Bobby Witt Jr. wasn't there, Michael Garcia would be the shortstop, which is a big step down than what Bobby Witt Jr. is. And then your third baseman, let's say Nick Lofton would have been there because this is before the Paul DeYoung days or anything like that, or maybe it would be an Adam Frazier. So I do think 10 to 15 games worse would be the Royals record without Bobby Witt Jr. But fortunately, Kansas City doesn't have to worry about that anytime soon. Okay, let's take our final break of the show. When we come back, we will wrap it up with all of our questions in this edition of Mailbag Friday. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor in FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're wanting to put a little money on tonight's game, 7:10 first pitch between the Royals and the Giants, why not bet on Michael Wacha? I'm taking the over on the innings pitched and the strikeout total for the big right-hander. He's been nails in his last 15 starts. I'd expect him to be good again tonight against San Francisco. All right, we still got a couple more questions to get to over on X. This one comes from Kanye, or Kanye, whatever you go by. I'm not really sure because X doesn't give you the pronunciation sheet. Are we hoping that either the Tigers or the Royals sweep their series against each other so that we have breathing room? Or are we hoping the Tigers sweep Minnesota since the Twins have the tiebreaker? I think from a safety point of it, I'm rooting for the Orioles this weekend, and I'm rooting for Boston. Because as I brought it up, if the Orioles keep winning, yes, that ensures that they're going to host the 5 seed in the playoff picture. And I would want more than anything for the Royals to get a home playoff game. But if it came down to gambling that and the Royals actually getting in, I would rather the Royals just go to Baltimore, right? So if the Royals take 3 from San Francisco and the Tigers get beat up by Baltimore, which I don't see happening, I think it's going to be a very competitive series. And if Boston takes care of Minnesota, you can kick your feet back on Monday and enjoy the off day before the Royals take on the Nationals. You're not nervous or anything. Because if the Tigers go out there and win tonight and you lose and Minnesota wins, now you really start to feel that noose tightening around your neck. And I don't think I want that. So what I'm rooting for is the rest of those AL Central teams to lose and the Royals keep winning, just so that that comfort can stay in the Royals' corner. And then root for the Yankees to beat the Orioles and make things interesting in the final week of the season. But right now, I'm more so focused on the Royals getting in than any sort of seeding. The Royals lost that luxury by getting swept by Detroit. So that's kind of what I'm rooting for. I know the questions about the Tigers or the Twins sweep their series. I would say that you would want, if it's between those two teams, which that happens, when is it? I don't think those two teams play again. So if you're meaning about this coming series, I'm not rooting for either of those teams to play well in it, and I know that would cost the Royals a top spot in the American League playoff picture. Esnu asked, what do you think Wacha is now worth on the open market? It's tough because he's going to be 33, I believe it is. And the starting pitching market was really weird last year. Like Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery pitched phenomenally, and they didn't get the deal they thought they would. And I'm sure Michael Wacha is taking that into account. Do I really want to go and hit the open market with the hopes of getting $20 million? Or should I just take the player option the Royals gave me? I've stayed pretty consistent with believing that Michael Wacha is going to take the option the Royals gave him. Now, what changes in that is if he goes on a tear in his final 2 starts here, and then he goes in the postseason and he's the best pitcher for the Royals in the postseason. Then you can hit the market and go, all right, I pitched in a wild card series, an ALDS series, an ALCS series. I'm worth $20 million. And maybe the Royals would try to go out there and give him that, reconstruct some form of a deal, but he could opt out and hit free agency, and maybe somebody desperate enough would give him a deal like that. But right now, I still have the belief that Michael Wacha is going to take that player option unless he dominates in the postseason, but the Royals first have to get there. But I think that right now, I think he's worth what his player option would be. So isn't that around 16 million? If I'm not mistaken, 16 to 17 million. I think he's worth about that. I don't know if he's a $20 million pitcher entering, his mid 30s at this point in time. Grady's question is, what is your ideal lineup consistently in these final 9 games? I'm going to go with Pham leading off. He's in left. Bobby Witt Jr. at short in the 2-hole. Perez behind the plate in the 3-hole. Massey at second base in the 4-hole. 5-hole, I'll go Yuli Gurriel at first base. 6-hole, I will go Hunter Renfroe in right field. 7-hole, I will say, who would that leave me with? I think 7-hole, I'll go with Fermin in the DH spot. And then 8-hole, I'll say Garcia at third. And then 9-hole, I'd say Isbell rounding it out and playing center field in the 9-hole. So I think that would be my ideal lineup over these final 9 games. Charles is going to ask, with Craig Kimbrell being DFA'd by Baltimore, would you be for or against getting him? Absolutely against getting him. I can only imagine the outrage that Royals fans would have with Craig Kimbrell coming in and then blowing a save or blowing his first opportunity that he had to hold on to a lead for Kansas City. You got to look at it this way. This late into the season, and the Orioles invested, I think, $13 million into Craig Kimbrell for 1 year. He was coming off a fine year for the Dodgers, I think it was. But he's past his prime, far past his prime. There is no way in hell there's anything left in the tank for Craig Kimbrell. And the Orioles didn't DFA him just to say, oh, we don't like him at all. We have better options. The reality is they don't. They were closing out the game with Sir Anthony Dominguez yesterday against the Giants, and they blew that game. They walked it off in the 9th, but they still blew that 1-run game. Craig Kimbrell could have been in that bullpen that was struggling. They don't have Felix Bautista because of the injury. They let go of Craig Kimbrell, and they already had a struggling bullpen. The Royals are going to look into that and go, it's not worth it. And they didn't take any flyer on any bullpen arm that became available over the course of the year, even when their group struggled. I think they've got their their guys lined up who they trust in certain games, and Craig Kimbrell would not give them too much of a boost. He's been one of the worst bullpen arms, over the last couple months. I think since June 1st, his ERA is near 7. So he would not be an upgrade over anybody that the Royals have in their bullpen right now. Jeff's question is, thanks for always doing this. It's a hypothetical question with rain in the forecast Saturday and Sunday. If both games end up getting canceled, when would they be made up? I look at the schedule. Neither team has a off day the rest of the season, a Monday off day, maybe you were meaning. Well, they got the word today that the game tomorrow night, which I will be in attendance for, got moved up from 6:10 to 4:10 because of bad weather. Sunday, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I think they're going to try everything in their power to get that game in. If they can't, it might be a scenario in which they play out the rest of the game. So San Francisco leaves. They're not playing for a playoff spot. And then if it came down to it, after that series against Atlanta, if the Royals had to play one more game, they would probably fly the Giants back, and they'd have to play a 9-inning game against the Giants to determine a playoff spot. That would be my only other thought because some of their off days don't match up there. So you hope the weather holds off for Sunday so they can get that game in, but they also could just leave it be. And if the Royals lock up a spot in Washington or Atlanta, they wouldn't need to worry about playing that game if it had no impact on seeding or actually getting into the postseason. Kev asked, do the Royals keep Kris Bubic in the bullpen in 2025? Thanks. My thing with Kris Bubic is when you got a good thing, I don't really want to mess with it. I think you got a great setup guy right now that's cheap, affordable. He's got stuff that plays well analytically, and eye test-wise, he looks really good. So I think I leave him in the bullpen for 2025 unless he really wants to be a starter and you give him that chance in spring training. And our last question comes from Taco. Do you think the Royals' attendance would increase if parking was only $5? I mean, probably. Yeah, I think if parking was cheap, if that's a real issue with a lot of people out there, cheaper parking would mean maybe more of a likelihood of buying the tickets and buying parking last minute. But if parking is something that deters a lot of people, maybe the Royals do need to look into it. But I would love to see more of a bigger turnout this weekend because I really believe this team deserves it in a playoff push right now. Something Royals fans have been wanting for 7 to 8 years, and they've got this opportunity now to really support this team, even though they've lost 4 in a row. Hopefully, some big crowds out this weekend. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter X at JohnnyJ_15. We want to thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Well, we are going to have an episode on Sunday, probably late afternoon, right after the game, recapping everything that happened in the series and take a look at the American League playoff picture. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.